Questions about the syllabus?
Yeah, I had a question. Can you hear me?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so it said something about there being like portfolios. Like, can you just explain in detail like what, or like briefly, like what we're gonna be doing for those portfolios?
Yes, so we're calling them portfolios because that means you collect the work that you do, so that you end up not with a series of disjointed exercises or anything like that. You actually end up with a portfolio that shows you the progress that you've made over the course of the assignment. So for example, for portfolio 1, that is the first 6 weeks of the course. You have an exercise. I'll answer questions about that in a moment. You have an exercise due by midnight on eClass. You need to bring it to your tutorial today because you'll be working with it and you'll be sharing it with others. Next week, you have another exercise due. It builds from the first one. You have another exercise due the next week that builds on the first 2. So by the time you finish and we get to the graded assignment, you have had a chance to draft, redraft, combine a series of exercises, learn a new skill that's important for your academic work each week, and then you end up with a portfolio. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Anyone else with a question about this syllabus? Okay, so I'm going to pull up my slides for a second.
Hi, Andrea.
Hi.
I actually had a question about the exercise that's due today.
Yes, we'll get to that in one moment.
All right, no worries.
Okay. So today our agenda is questions about the syllabus. I want to spend a few minutes on communicating in academic circles because that's something you need to learn very quickly. I will summarize last week. We're then going to go into reading for form alongside content. We will then move to the main work of the day, or part of the main work of the day, which is reading scenes and writing scenes. We will have a poll at the end of this class where you decide where you want to continue with the synchronous lectures where we all gather together at the same time, or move to asynchronous, which means that I would pre-record the lectures for the rest of portfolio 1. So, common questions about the syllabus that nobody has asked yet. I assume you all did your homework and actually read them. There are no exams in this course. There are no textbooks to buy. I want you to pay particular attention to the extension and late policy. You can obtain a week's extension with no questions asked by simply emailing your tutorial leader with a polite request for an extension. You'll find their email addresses on the syllabus, and your TAs are your first port of call. If you need more time because of the times we live in due to your own illness, a family emergency, having to care for others, etc., then please email your tutorial leader and CC the course directors. For the first module, that would be me. You can also include Stephanie. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment to go back to exercise 1. There are a lot of questions about exercise 1. I'll answer the easiest one first. Take your exercise to your tutorial. That gives you the chance, if your colleagues and peers make a comment that you think, wow, I really want to incorporate that in my exercise before I submit it for comments, then you have the chance to do it. Your exercise is due by submission on eClass by midnight. You'll see the time 11:59. If you hand it in a few minutes late, don't worry about it. We realize that e-class is going up and down today. The next question is about the citation. I will be showing you a sample of the kind of citation you do for artworks, okay, later on. Okay, so there are a couple of things here that this gets a little complicated. Generally speaking, for an image, you can cite the site you got the image from, but it's like any kind of text. If you can find the original site, that would be better. You can usually do it by doing a reverse image search, or if the site itself has good citation practices, then it should tell you where the image came from. Next question. Exercise 1 mentions something about creating word art. What that actually means is we want you to write a description of your artwork so that we can see it without having to look at it. So you have to use words to paint the picture that we cannot see. It doesn't mean you have to be verbose. It does mean you have to pay careful attention to detail and into crafting that description. So you have to decide what's important about the piece of art that you chose, or the photograph, or the album cover. And you have to decide on an order. What are you going to show us in words? So hopefully that answers that. So someone asked a question if we're required to share our exercises at the start of the tutorial but submitted in the evening. Are we expected to fix anything in the exercises? Essentially, the time lapse is once again so that you can take comments from your peers, consider them, and consider incorporating them. So when someone makes a comment, listen to it carefully. It is always your choice whether to do something about it or not. So it's not a case of fixing in the sense that we don't look at right and wrong in this class. There is no one right way to describe a photograph or a painting or an album cover. It's more a case of look at the content and look at the way that you've described it. Is that appropriate for the particular work? And are you meeting what we're asking you to do in the exercise instructions? Okay, I'm going to deal with this issue about length right now because I get asked it every single term. So we give you maximum page limits because we don't want you to waste words. We are far more interested in quality than we are in quantity. So if you have, say, a maximum 1-page limit for the exercise description, and you can do it in half or 3/4 of a double-spaced page, that's fine. If you spill over a bit and every word that you spill over is necessary, then that's fine, because again, we're looking for quality. So we're not going to mark you down because you gave us something that's longer than the maximum. You will receive a lesser grade if you give us 10 pages instead of 5, and it really wasn't necessary to write 10 because your work is full of repetitions and long, wordy sentences. So hopefully that answers your question. You are free to go over the word limit, but you had better think carefully about whether it was necessary to do that. If the content, if the thinking is valuable, fine. Please know that your tutorial leaders are under time constraints. So when it comes to exercise 1.2, it could be that you need to run over. In that case, we'll read to the maximum, and that's what you'll get comments on. Landmark or location can be viewed as an artwork if it appears in a photograph, and as long as that photograph is professionally published. You submit all exercises on eClass. Thank you for answering that online. Page and a half, I'm sorry, is too long for what you've been asked to do for exercise 1. So now you're going to have to make decisions. If that happened to you, you're going to have to make decisions based on what are the most important features of this particular artwork that you are describing. Citation for an album name, you're doing just fine with what you have down here. You'll find the font size in the syllabus. Thank you, Stephanie. She's put up a link for walking you through how to verify images. And Dalton, I see you have a question. Why don't you go ahead, please?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, I was wondering more so about the actual format of the writing. So I'm more used to like essay writing. So when I did the exercise, I did a full title page. I had it all in like size 12 font, Times New Roman. I just didn't know if there was like any requirements like that.
Okay, so thank you. That's a really good question, Dalton. So to begin with, you're not writing an essay right now. So, you know, you might want to look at your work. And if you gave us an essay-like introduction, we don't need it. You're just writing an exercise. Now, Dalton, you asked good questions about format and such. There are a couple of really important things to remember. First, you have to look at the course. Some professors want the full title page and so on and so forth to get you used to it. In this class, we don't. What is really important is that your preferred name and your student ID number are right in the piece of work that you're handing in. That is a really good editorial practice to get into for writers, putting your name on a work in the work itself. We are all remote right now. We are all looking at your work digitally, but consider the way that things used to be where someone might be carrying around a set of manuscripts to look at. If they drop them and your name is not in the work, if it's on a separate page, then we don't know whose it is. So at a minimum, your name and your student ID number. And when I say preferred name, not necessarily the one on the registrar's list, the one that you prefer to use. Secondly, it's really helpful if you put the course number in there too. It can be at the top of the page along with your name and your student ID number and the exercise number. This is exercise 1.1. So what you're doing is you're saving whoever's looking at your work or commenting on it, you're saving them work. Identify yourself in two ways: name, student number, identify the course, identify the assignment you're handing in. Does that help, Dalton? Great.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Let me just pull up my participants list because I think I saw another hand up here. Nope, the hand's gone down. You don't need to put your student number as the file name. It's very helpful if when you name your file, you can call it something like first name, last name, X11, so that we have an instant identifier on it. Okay, so we seem to be through with questions about the syllabus and the exercise. I am going to move on to some of the work for today. This is something I added after reading my emails, not necessarily from this course, by the way. So this doesn't doesn't actually come from you. I'm going to show you an email I received from another university far away. Some years ago, it holds as true now as it did back then. And I want you to read this email I got. The question I have for you is, how would you feel if you got this email in your inbox when you were running a course for 200 people with 8 tutorial sections and 4 people by the same name in it? Please note, I have changed the name of the person who sent the email, and I have changed the email address it was sent from to something similar, but that protects the identity of the person who sent it. So how would you feel? Name an emotion that you would feel if you got this email. Confusion, yes. Annoyed, yes. Irritated, yes. Disbelief, who? Frustrated, yes, exactly. So headache, definitely. So tell me now, what's the problem, or what are the problems with this email? Point to something specific. Edgar, you said Mike. What's the problem with that?
Like, there's 4 mics and it's just, we don't know who it is.
Yeah, we don't know who it is. So saying the full name, those of you who, I'm sorry, I'm still reading the responses to this email. Yes, you need to sign your full name because we can't always identify you if there are several people in the course or in the tutorial by the same name. Someone else pointed out subject, no subject. There is one here, extension, but what's wrong with it? No proper subject. There's, okay, so I'm going to take these one at a time. And this becomes interesting. So yeah, you're right. No course number stated. Subject is just an extension. We don't know what for what. And then, as many of you had pointed out, this is informal. You can point to things in this. There are no initial caps. We don't know which course this is. We don't know anything really about the assignments or the tutorial or anything like that. So it is vague. Someone said it is a demand rather than a request. And that's really important. So I won't have time to go into Bourdieu today. We will be looking at him probably next week. What he talks about is power. And when you are moving in academic circles, it has to be acknowledged that there are levels of power. This holds true of industry as well. When you are in the workplace, you have managers, you have presidents, you have employers. If someone has power over you in the sense of they assess your work, and I don't just mean academic work, or they direct you as they do in the workplace, then you need to deal with requests very carefully. So requesting and being courteous and giving us information so that we don't have to work is always a good policy. Otherwise, people tend to get irritated. Someone has also said, thank you for this, change the Mrs. Mackenzie to Professor Mackenzie. Why would we do this? Well, here's a case of, it becomes interesting. In my particular home community, which is a small village in southwestern Ontario, using Mrs. is considered a sign of respect. It's not necessarily used just for people who are married. It is definitely a sign of respect based on grounds of age or whatever. When you move into different circles, and you are now in academic circles, we use different markers of respect. So Mrs., essentially in academic circles, the status of a professor or an instructor's marriage is irrelevant. The markers of respect tend to focus on education. So in education, what is valued are things like degrees. If someone is in charge of a course and they are an instructor, then that means they have the experience and the education to qualify to teach. And that holds true for all of your tutorial leaders and also for the course directors. And that holds true of all of your courses. So in academics, think about it this way: you would not call a male professor Mr. You wouldn't call a female professor Ms. or Mrs. And you certainly wouldn't call a course director either of those two, or a tutorial leader either of those two. In academics, the values, once again, being based on education, means that you are much safer calling people professor or doctor. Those are the values that hold true here, where education matters much more than marital status. I would also point out, though, that whatever communities hold true wherever you come from, wherever in the world that is, that does not mean you should throw them away or no longer respect them. You need to become what I call bi-rhetorical. You need to become good at reading different situations and reading different communities. In this community, generally speaking, you lift up, you speak to people as professor or as doctor, if they're in those circumstances, unless and until they tell you differently. So as Stephanie has put into the chat, professor or doctor works well for me. I'd prefer you not presume my age or marital status with Miss, Ms, or Mrs, or Miss. Thanks very much. So when you deal with people who are in power, one of the first things you should think about is how to address them, how to do so to show respect, and what is appropriate for that. Here, it happens to be professor or instructor. I would add, you have my full permission to call me Andrea when you address me, as long as you don't call me, hey you, Ms., Mrs., or Miss, I am quite happy. So please, Andrea, if you're not comfortable with that, professor or doctor. Take a look at this changed request. I am doing this week because there has been so much emotion floating around in emails from students to professors, not about extensions. Please note the subject line, WRIT 1003, tutorial 5, extension request for portfolio 1. The principle here is don't make people work. The last email, I would have had to probably have several exchanges with whoever Mike is to find out all this information. One last thing to point out about this that I don't know if anybody noticed. Emailing a professor or an employer from Young God 1317 is probably not the wisest idea. You have to make sure your email address is professional as well. Give us all the information we need so that we can answer you in one shot, not several. So we name the course, the tutorial. We make this a polite request. We name the portfolio. We ask, we do not demand. This student also gives information about the current due date and when the extension would last to, including preferred name and student numbers. Do you have any questions about that? And yes, Edgar, thank you very much for that because you worked for that title. We did indeed. So we're going to move along to the interesting work for the day after I state the principles. Once again, do not make us work, do not make us work, do not make us work. Always remain courteous and professional. Assume formality of title until you're told otherwise. And here's something that may seem a little odd in this day of texts and instant responses. It's called the 24-hour rule. If a message upsets you, and I mean really upsets you to the point where you can't step back from it, always wait 24 hours before responding. If you must, draft a response offline to get rid of the emotion, and then revise it after 24 hours to lower the temperature. You must send a calm, professional response that usually gets much more of a good answer than sending out that highly emotional content. In other words, you're trying to dial down the temperature instead of raising it. I can't emphasize this enough. It really, really helps, especially when you move into the working world. Stephanie has also commented, by the way, that we, the teaching team, will also show you respect by using your preferred pronouns and name. She is indeed right. Respect goes both ways, so keep that in mind. Okay, I would like at this point to move on to reading form alongside content. We're going to begin, as we did last week, by noticing. This is a sentence written by John Henry Cardinal Newman. And what I would like you to do is simply highlight or jot down keywords or important phrases. But I would also like you to look for the way the sentence is written and for the patterns you see. So the work that I'd like you to do right now, this moment, is right there on the screen. I want to add one thing to it. What are the two most important words in this sentence? I'll read it out loud so that everyone has the chance of not only reading but listening. We know, not by a direct and simple vision, not at a glance, but, as it were, by piecemeal and accumulation, by a mental process, by going round an object, by the comparison, the combination, the mutual correction, the continual adaptation of many partial notions, by the employment, concentration, and joint action of many faculties and exercises of mind. So take a couple of minutes to think about the sentence. Always be kind when you're making comments. So keywords and important phrases. Let's start there. When I say keywords, I mean the most important words. Someone has said not and by. Someone else had said by. No and were. Okay, now we're starting to hear patterns, so try moving to those. A by is repeated, giving rhythm. Thank you. Yeah. There are several words that end in ION. I have momentarily lost the chat. It suddenly messed up and started printing the same thing over and over again. Hang on 1 second. I'm going to stop sharing for just 1 instant. This is really interesting. The meeting controls have vanished. Stephanie, are you in as co-host? So if anyone can hear me, I think I have lost the meeting.
Andrea, we can hear you. Can you hear me? It's Janet.
I can hear you, but I can't see anything. The meeting controls have gone very funny indeed, and I'm unable to see any of the controls at all.
We see you and hear you very well.
This is too funny. Okay, so I need a chat monitor because I can't see anything at all on the screen. Stephanie, would you mind doing that? And I also need someone else to look for hands on the participants list if one of the tutorial leaders would like to volunteer for that.
Andrea, so would you like me to read out what students are saying?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I guess we're still talking about important words.
Yes.
Ethan has said faculties and exercises. Domenico says the sentence can be shortened. Akib is suggesting that you try pressing Alt in order to help your situation.
Thank you, Ethan. That didn't work, but I did get back the share screen. I have no meeting controls though. So this is going to be fascinating.
Do you want to send, are you able to switch PowerPoint slides as well, or is that going to be a problem?
No, that's not a problem.
Okay. Robert is suggesting maybe turning off the closed captioning and seeing if that helps, and then turning it back on. You don't have meeting controls, so you might not be able to do that.
No, I do not.
Okay. So back to focusing on the sentence.
Yes.
Timo is saying partial notions kind of kind of displays the message of the entire sentence.
Which phrase was that again?
I think that Timo is referring to the fact that they're short, sort of truncated lists, and it displays the message, or it reflects in parallel how we know.
Okay.
Like by accumulation. Maybe that's my interpretation. Timo, maybe you can tell me if that's what you meant in the chat. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Timo. Anyone else? Before we go further, what is this sentence telling us? Can you put that in your own words in the chat briefly?
Evan Paul says it means how we know.
Yes, that is a very concise way of summarizing the content of the sentence. We would need to go on and account for the rest of the sentence. So the sentence itself is about obtaining knowledge. I think it might help when you are examining, when you're doing close reading. Sometimes it helps to break down the sentence and we can then see it better. So,
Dalton, sorry, Andrea.
so
to your last point, break down the sentence so we can see it better. Dalton Moreau has said that the structure of the sentence is, we know not by blank, but by blank.
interesting. Okay, we know are probably the most two important words in the entire sentence because they point us immediately to what the sentence is about, to the thought it contains. And we then see all these repetitions. We see not. And if we look at the content, Newman is telling us that we don't gain knowledge simply by glancing or by direct, simple looking. Then there is that but, which is another important word. And we then have all of these repetitions of by. So we have by piecemeal and accumulation, by a mental process, by going round an object, by the comparison, the combination, the mutual correction, the continual adaptation of many partial notions, by the employment, concentration, and joint action of many faculties and exercises of mind. Why would Newman do this when he is writing a sentence about knowledge? What impact do these repetitions have? At this point, because I'm sitting here unable to see the chat, it would be really helpful if people would start unmuting their microphones and actually talking so that I can hear you. You don't have to, of course, but it would be helpful. So what do you think? Why these patterns of repetition? How do they fit the content that we're seeing?
May I jump in?
Yes, of course. If you wouldn't mind telling me who you are, because I can't see your name either.
Oh, no worries. This is Dalton Moreau.
Okay.
So for me, this also kind of reminds me of when I was in elementary school and we were studying Martin Luther King's speech. And it's very common for preachers to use this idea of repeating the same idea, but maybe rewording it in order to come across the most people, right? So if you don't know what one word means, you might know what another word means. So I keep repeating the same thing in different words until it is pretty common knowledge that you understand what I'm saying. So I understood this as we know not by simply acknowledging something, but by truly examining something.
Okay, thank you, Dalton. That's an interesting way to read the sentence. My question for you and the rest of the class would be, does a mental process mean the same thing as the employment, concentration, and joint action of many faculties and exercises of mind? Or if going round an object means the same thing as comparison?
There are comments in the chat that the constant repetition results in emphasis.
Okay.
And I guess it's sort of a rhetorical effect.
Mm-hmm. For emphasis works. Anyone else?
Can I jump in?
Yes, of course. Just please tell me who you are.
Yeah, my name is Janat Jacoby. So I also like wrote in the chat like when I read this like text, like I feel like this is Newman was kind of displaying like the subtle notion of the brain and human mind like towards knowledge and kind of accumulating knowledge, and like just like the use of repetition and like just the rhythm of words that end with ION. It reminds me of like how when my brain is like introduced with new knowledge and how like I want to like dissect it and how I compare it, and I'm just using words from the text here, and how I like my brain adapts to it. So I feel like this text is such a it's like a conscious thing of the mind towards knowledge, but also like an unconscious thing towards the mind too. Like he's kind of displaying the subconscious human mind towards knowledge. So
Okay.
that's my interpretation.
Thank you for that. It is interesting when you think about it. I chose this sentence deliberately, by the way. Not sure who that was. I chose this sentence deliberately because it is about knowledge, and I think it says something profound. If you look at the first part, we do not gain knowledge by a direct and simple vision or at a glance, and we're all too prone to do that. The second part of the sentence after the but shows you all kinds of methods that we have to use to obtain knowledge, to obtain understanding. Each of these is different. So piecemeal and accumulation, and then all kinds of methods for obtaining that. Going round an object, comparing, combining, correction, adaptation of many partial notions until we put them together. How do we get there? Employment, concentration, and joint action. So in essence, one of the reasons why the sentence is so long and windy is because the form is actually demonstrating the content that he's giving us. That's what we strive for in writing, to make the form and content meld together.
Andrea, can I say something?
Yes,
It's
please go
Rosita.
ahead.
If we have to imagine this sentence and in any kind of visual manner, what's going on in this sentence, it's more like the direct and simple vision is almost like a linear motion. So we know not in a linear way, but we know in a very circular way when you add and you look at different angles. So every word that is added is more like, well, can you look at it from this angle and then from another angle, and can you go around? And so even the very word around is there. So it's more like a collection, an assembly of ways, as you said, of methods in a more circular manner, in a more rather than the linear, one direct, simple way of, well, you got it, that's it.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much for that. So those entering university or in university, this is how we learn. This is how we obtain knowledge. This is how we reflect and think and grow. At this time, what I would like you to do, I'll put the sentence back in a second. I would like you to take 3 minutes to express what Newman's telling us in your own words in a good paragraph. So 3 or 4 sentences. In a second paragraph, talk about the form, that is the way he tells it. How does that fit the content, the thought he's expressing? Point to the patterns that you see in his work. Lastly, and most importantly, go back to the first paragraph where you expressed his thought in your own words and answer the question, what do you make of this thought? So you have till 11 o'clock. You can write short paragraphs. If I could get the chat, I would simply put this into the chat so that you can see it, but I can't. Thank you, Stephanie.
So, Andrea, sorry, what was the third paragraph? The first one is summarize the meaning of the sentence, right?
Yeah, and 2 or 3 good sentences or 1 paragraph. The second one is, how does the way that Newman tells it, that is, point to the patterns you see in Newman's work and why those patterns fit the content.
And in the third paragraph, no?
Okay, go back to your first paragraph where you express Newman's thoughts in your own words, and then just answer the question, what do you make of his thought? What do you think about what he says about knowledge?
Okay. So like, do you agree or disagree or?
No, no, do not argue. It's simply, what do you make of his thought? What do you think of it?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're interpreting it, basically.
So I am now going to shut down my computer, which means the meeting may close. I don't know whether it will or not. At any rate, I will rejoin, and hopefully that will solve the technical problems. So thanks for your patience. Please keep writing while I'm gone. And please rejoin if the meeting closes. Excellent. Thank you, Stephanie. All right, who needs more time? If you need more time, please raise your virtual hand. Okay, take another 2 minutes, please. So for the third paragraph, I am going to carefully try to share my screen again. I most certainly hope that this is our form of technical difficulties for the term. So in the third paragraph, go back and read what you wrote in the first paragraph. And what do you make of his thought? What do you make of what Newman is telling us? What do you think? Once you've finished that third paragraph, try copying it into the chat so that we can see it. When I record the lecture, it also records the chat. And Ethan has a nice paragraph up here. Newman expresses the many ways the human mind knows. Through a series of ways we learn and retain information. Instead of merely seeing an object, we truly learn about it by studying the object and comparing it to other things we already know. This creates a true understanding about the object in relation to itself and other objects and pieces of information that cannot be achieved otherwise through simply seeing it. That, Ethan, is a really good explanation of what Newman is telling us. What you need to do now is, what do you think of what Newman is saying? John has a really nice second paragraph where he speaks about the form of the writing. So people are doing really good work for telling us what Newman is telling us. I see that Timo is putting up all three paragraphs and has put the kind of thinking work that I'm asking for into that third paragraph. We need to move on because we don't have a lot of time left. I am sorry that technical factors took a great deal of valuable time out of this class today. At this point, I just want to reiterate why we spent so long on a single sentence. Noticing form and structure, the basics of it is quite simple. You don't need to know all the English literature, expressions, and names for things. What you need to notice are things like, are sentences long or short, or are they varied? Are they winding with lots of commas and phrases, or are they concise and direct? Does the subject, that is what the sentence is about, come in the beginning of the sentence or later on? Are images and such used or not? And is the writing direct or not? Why does this matter? You always need to begin by astutely noticing both form and content. Most people only look at content. This is a professional writing class, and you intend to become professional writers. This will also help you in your work throughout university, by the way. You have to look at the way things are written, as well as the content and how that melds or does not with the content. You build patterns again from what you've noticed, just as we did last week. That becomes your evidence. Use evidence to interpret the writer's complex thought or idea. And I would note, regardless of what you were taught in high school, you should never reduce a creator's essay, novel, film, or other work down to a one-sentence message. They have put the work into writing or creating something, and they deserve more than that. You then move to the third paragraph. That's what we call thought reflection. It is quite simply, what do you make of that thought or idea? It's asking you to think. Here's another takeaway. Form and style are always integral to conveying meaning and content. There are different disciplines and obviously many different forms of writers. If you want to become a creative writer, then form and style become pointers to your ideas. But if you are in academics, you need to be aware that each discipline and field, whether you're in English or science or economics or business, has its own form and style. You will help yourself a great deal by learning to read for the way a piece is written. For business and industry writers, I know from experience, because I spent decades there, each company has its own distinctive form and style. You have to learn how to read it. So we read both to learn how to write appropriately for the occasion or situation, and also to learn strategies and expectations. This small piece of work that you have done in class today, looking for patterns of form, is learning for life. We will expand on it and complicate it, but you will use it for the rest of your life if you learn how to do it well. I have to very quickly move on to reading scenes and writing scenes because that's really important work for your next exercise, exercise 1.2. If you recall, last week we looked at scenes from a film. Here is the painting that was based on by Johannes Vermeer. It's called Girl with a Pearl Earring. Here is a sample MLA citation of this painting. Straightforwardly, it is artist last name, first name, the title in italics, the date, and the location of the displayed work. Out of this painting, an author wrote a book. From the book came the painting. Art does inspire us, whether it is photographs, paintings, sculpture, album covers. We now move to scene, and you were asked to read Mitha Nandagopalan's essay this week, Infinity Between Us. We are about to do the same work with Mitha's opening scene, and we're going to be doing it very quickly, that you did with the film last week. It is more difficult with text, but essentially, when I say opening scene, I am cautiously going to try stopping this share and moving to another one. When I talk about the opening scene, you can tell it is self-contained, even though it is part of the longer essay. It is actually the opening of the essay. And the scene itself begins with I stand before a red door, and it ends with I'll show you where you're sleeping, he says, and I follow him up the stairs. So if this were in a movie, you can see how the scene is self-contained. It has a beginning, it has a natural ending, and there is an idea conveyed within the scene itself. So we don't have a lot of time. I'm wondering if people can very quickly pick out patterns that they noticed while they were reading. Strategies the writer used, strategies about color, any kind of pattern that you notice in this particular scene. And I can now see the chat, so you can either use your virtual hand or you can type them into the chat. And I'm talking about the opening scene only. Micah says the color gray and morning. Yes, what other color is right in that opening sentence? Red and dark cranberry. So we have dark red contrasting with gray. Why is that? Edgar's got lots of color usage. Red door, dark cranberry color, gray house, also gray gloves. We have a pattern of Jeff with whom. Yes, for emphasis. And Jessica, that's very nice to hone in on the significance of Jeff's character to the narrator. Anyone else?
Is it okay if I add something?
Yes, of course. Please go ahead, John.
So I feel like the first little paragraph there says a lot about color. So that kind of helps the reader kind of understand the setting of it all. But then the next paragraph, it does more verbs, so more action. So then once you have the setting, it uses less color and more action. So then you can kind of picture what the characters are doing, what's going on.
Yes, that's a very astute comment. Thank you, John. So we get the colors setting up the scene in the very first paragraph, and then we move to action. But we don't get, and then we get Jeff. Something I want you to notice here is this is written in sentences and paragraphs, and then we have a single word with a period after it, the other character's name, focusing attention on that character. We get an entire paragraph describing what went into their relationship. And then we get the drop. We are here after so long to mourn his older brother who turned 17 a week ago and died 4 days after that. That is the dropping point. That begins the thinking work or adds to the thought that is going into this paragraph. We now see why that dark cranberry color and the gray, why there is the contrast, and where there is perfect backdrop for a Christmas wreath and the season calls for one, but there is no wreath and this is no occasion for festivity. This is very skillfully written. Also notice the use of dialogue. Characters are talking. And then the wind down. This is written by a student in a first-year writing course, by the way, this entire essay. It was award-winning. Once again, I am out of time, so I'm going to go through this quickly. If you haven't guessed yet, you probably will in a minute about what you're going to be doing for your next exercise. I would call on you to do this work on your own. Tell us what you notice out of that opening scene. Keywords, phrases, repetitions, words that open up or change, and build patterns from them, at least two that focus on content, one that focuses on form. Name those patterns and add one to the chat, though we can't do that now. I want you to keep in mind, and I will post these PowerPoints, details are evidence. It's how you begin reading any strange text in any form. You move from details to patterns and you name them. So for example, a contrast of color might be one for this one. Friendship might be another. Mourning or grief might be a third. It's what you make of the relationship among those patterns that becomes the beginnings of interpretation. In scenes, some quick questions to ask. And I'm going to have to answer them. This was supposed to be our discussion today. How much time elapses over the course of this opening scene? A few minutes, not years, not a lifetime, just a few minutes, an actual moment. Look carefully at how the characters are introduced to us, knowing that we come as strangers to this text and we don't know these people. Where does the scene take place? And when does it take place? We should be able to tell, and we can. What's the relationship between the characters? We are shown that. Meetha does a wonderful job of showing us the relationship between herself and Jeff at that young childhood age, and now when they've been apart in this situation. But there's also a moment of knowledge or of transformation. It is when she realizes that it's near the end. It is when she realizes that they are not going to do her scripted talk, when she is miserable and helpless, when she cannot see his grief and she has no right to it. It starts with a line, but something passes between us as we stare at each other, something that whispers of the memory of friendship and the nature of loss, of the illusions two strangers might offer each other. It isn't much, it isn't enough, but it's a start. If you think of Girl with a Pearl Earring and you don't understand what a moment of knowledge or transformation is, think of the scene where WRIT gazes out the window when Vermeer asks her, what color are the clouds? And first she says white, and then she says no, and she really looks, just as Newman tells us to. She doesn't just glance, she really, really looks. And she finds that they are yellow and blue and gray. That is a moment of transformation when thinking changes. Meetha includes several more scenes in this piece of writing. See if you can find them. So your next exercise, exercise 1.2, the one that comes out after the description of the piece of artwork. I want you to note you would be writing a textual scene like the one Meetha wrote. You're not writing a film script, you're writing something like Meetha wrote. Exercise 1.2 tells you to look again at your artwork and write a scene that shows us a real life memory that's somehow connected to the artwork that you chose. Your scene should not be about how you discovered the artwork, but it's important that it be real, that there be a connection, and you don't have to tell us what that connection is. The important thing to remember when you write is to show us. Use as many strategies as are appropriate. Show us what happened, don't just tell us. Show a moment in time, not years. Make sure you introduce characters, setting, time period. Any kind of memory builds towards some kind of shift, some kind of transformation in thinking, something like that, a moment of realization. In order to show us that, it means you have to show us your thinking or your emotions. The writing strategies you use in the style obviously should match the content of your memory. Please note, this is public writing. You are going to share your scene in the tutorial next week. Should you find yourself writing about something that is too private to share, then change your artwork. You have our permission to do that and write about something else. The maximum page length is 2 pages double spaced. You can write more, but that's as far as we'll read and comment. Do you have any questions about that? And I'm seeing a couple of people with their hands up. Jesus, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, Jesus or Jesus. Please go ahead. Monica, please go ahead. Ruby.
A lot of these hands have been up since you asked if people needed more time.
Yeah, I kind of figured that. Ruby, do you have a question or is your hand just raised?
Yeah, I do have a question. My question is, for the exercise 1.2, does this mean the memory, it can be a random memory and it has to be something connected to the artwork we chose for 1.1?
That's right. It has to be somehow connected to the artwork.
Okay, thank you.
The example is contained in the reading that you had for this week. All the readings are on the syllabus and they're also on eClass. So you can look at it as much as you like. And that's Jesus. Is that correct? Okay, thank you. And Vera or Vera?
Oh yeah, just making sure you're gonna post these slideshows, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay, perfect.
And Anna, yes, the piece of artwork can be a photograph so long as it is published photograph done by a professional. It cannot be a personal photograph. Okay, so I'm going to move to the last part, and after I'm sorry.
Wait, how is it supposed to be a memory if you like choose a photograph that wasn't related to you?
Presumably you chose the photograph because you liked it. So you have thinking work to do about what memory. It doesn't have to be obviously related. What memory might be related to that?
So the only homework to do is 1 and 2.
I'm sorry, I missed that completely, Nicole.
The only homework we have to do is 1 and 2.
You will see that on the syllabus, and you'll actually find the full instructions for exercise 1.2 on eClass under week 2. So let me see if this works. I am going to launch a poll now, and I'll be very interested in the results. What I'm asking you is, do you want the lectures to be synchronous like it has been today, even after this dreadful experience? Or would you prefer asynchronous, which means I pre-record the lectures and I post them to eClass, and essentially we would show up at 10 o'clock to answer any of your questions. This is for the rest of module 1. Asynchronous lectures, I would try very hard to have them up on Saturday, but I expect it would be Sunday. Sunday before Tuesday, you would be expected to have watched them, and I will tell you that it would not be simply an hour and a quarter of me talking. I would pause to get you to write. It would probably be 15 minutes, break to write something or to think, another 15 minutes, and so on and so forth.
Wait, sorry. So if the lectures are asynchronous, like they're pre-recorded, so we're still meeting on Tuesdays at 10 a.m.
No, you don't have to. It would essentially mean that whoever is, well, I'm the course director for this module. It means I will be here at 10 o'clock on Tuesdays to answer your questions you come up with based on the pre-recorded lectures. But no, we would not be meeting at 10 o'clock all together.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Okay. So asynchronous it is. I will try and have the lectures up on Saturday, if that's at all possible. They will be posted to eClass. And I just want to take one last look at the chat. Timo asked, does the scene need to have dialogue? And if it does, that is entirely up to you. So if dialogue is one way of showing us, then by all means include it. It's a good strategy. Yeah, it does take up a lot of space, but it's worth it, can be worth it. I'm going to end the poll and share the results so that you can all see it. So it was 60-40 async to sync. Those of you who still want personal contact can still show up at 10 o'clock to ask questions, ask for comments, et cetera, et cetera. So I thank you all for staying overtime today. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties. I will remain behind to answer any other questions that you have. The rest of you are free to go, with thanks for your patience today through the difficulties. Bye.